And welcome to the Emerging Tech Horizons podcast. I'm Arun Serafin, NDIA's Executive Director for its Emerging Technologies Institute. Today we're going to talk about high-skilled immigration and the role of foreign-born STEM talent in defense, as well as in the overall S&T enterprise. As we all know, there are many initiatives underway to increase the supply of domestic STEM talent into our defense sector. But today we're going to cover what prompts the need for the U.S. to seek out alternative sources of STEM talent, how to best balance national security concerns while attracting international expertise to boost our overall STEM supply, and how the Pentagon could approach leveraging this existing source of STEM talent. I'm joined today by one of ETI's Associate Research Fellows, returning guest Wilson Miles, and Jeremy Neufeld, who's a Senior Immigration Fellow at the Institute for Progress. They are co-authors of the recently released ETI IFP report called Strengthening the National Security Innovation Base Requires International STEM Talent. Wilson, Jeremy, thanks for joining the podcast.
Thanks so much.
So I want to get into it, but first, Jeremy, I want you to tell us a little bit about Institute for Progress in case people aren't familiar with IFP.
Sure. So the Institute for Progress is a relatively new think tank that focuses on science and innovation policy. So we're really interested in how we can advance scientific, technological, and industrial progress in the United States. And that ranges from everything from science funding, how can we make sure our scientific institutions are best poised to make breakthroughs and not make scientific discoveries that aren't as valuable to the United States. Goes from that to infrastructure. Why does it cost so much to build? To biotechnology, how can we make biotechnology breakthroughs here in the US? And to what I work on, which is high-skilled immigration. How can the United States continue to be the destination for the world's best and brightest so that we can benefit from the best scientists from around the world?
And so what types of products do you put out or events do you hold?
Yeah, so we're a nonpartisan think tank. So we put research products on our website, ifp.org. And we are particularly interested in targeted, actionable policies that are nonpartisan.
Yeah, and we've had a great partnership with the folks at IFP, thinking largely about the immigration issue to date and STEM talent issues, but also just on research funding and innovation issues more broadly. And this report then is an example of a partnership between our two organizations that kind of looks at this foreign talent issue through a defense sector lens. And so it'd be a great opportunity for us to dig into this. So let's just start by framing the problem, Jeremy. What do you think, or Wilson, what do you think explains the need for the defense sector to think about this issue of high-skilled immigration?
Yeah, so I think of high-skilled immigration as a huge geopolitical and strategic advantage for the United States. Right now, some of the best minds from around the world want to come here, and when they can do so, we're able to make huge advancements in the US. But unfortunately, when they can't, it can actually benefit our adversaries. So let me just start out with a story that I think really sums up this issue. It starts out with a Turkish international student named Erdal Arikan. He studied at MIT and the California Institute for Technology as well, got advanced degrees in the US, and published an important paper on telecommunications, and he was trying to get a green card, which is a way to stay in the United States permanently. When he failed to get a green card, he ended up moving back to Turkey, where he ended up getting recruited by the Chinese, where he then took his research that he had been working on to make the fundamental breakthroughs that allowed Huawei to develop 5G. And so this is a story where literally one green card, if we gave one green card to the right person.
He was trained in the U.S.
Exactly. He was trained at MIT,
stay in the US.
And he wanted to stay. And if we had given a green card to him, the U.S. could be the world's leader in 5G instead of China. So in many ways, emerging technologies, the fortunes of them are going to rise and fall based on the top minds who are developing them. And so if we can attract them here instead of having them work for our adversaries, it's going to put the U.S. At a huge advantage.
Yeah, and I guess to bring it to the report, so I think the report does a nice job in terms of outlining a lot of data, describing the problem with some facts out there. And so we include a lot of surveys, we include a lot of kind of we lean on other organizations who have written kind of call to action type letters either through different associations or societies. And so an example of that is in 2023, the American Council of Engineering Companies wrote a letter to the last administration and said that 49% of engineering companies were experiencing issues holding on and obtaining new contracts due to shortages in staff. The Reagan Institute's 2024 National Security Innovation-Based Report Card describes a similar problem. One of the major critical vulnerabilities that they outline is in this talent pipeline, and they have kind of three pieces of data to support that. And they are, there's a retirement bubble on the horizon. They show that the talent pool in 21 states that traditionally attract large defense dollars is it's shrinking. The third is that the manufacturing industry's share of H-1B visas approvals are decreasing. NDIA has its annual vital signs survey, and so we're about to release 2025. In 2023, 82% of NDIA member companies in the defense industrial base noted that it's difficult to find qualified STEM workers. About 64% of them reported that it was somewhat difficult or very difficult to find skilled trade workers. And then in 2024, the numbers improve a little bit. 55% of NDIA member companies reported that it's difficult to find qualified STEM workers. That's a pretty big improvement. 59% still reported that it was still somewhat difficult or very difficult to find skilled trade and clearable workers. And in addition to those data points, the report also identifies the top 4 barriers to filling vacancies, which were competition with the non-defense commercial sector, lack of qualified candidates, defense industries just generally not an attractive career option for students and then young professionals, and then an inability to be competitive at government-specified labor rates.
So stepping back, for the report, talk a little bit about the methodology. How did you put together the report and the findings?
Yeah, so I think of the report as basically pursuing 2 main methodological strategies. The first is very qualitative. We interviewed officials from the DoD and people working in the defense industrial base across different sectors to get their assessment of what the workforce needs were that they were facing and the potential role for international talent and their experience working with people from around the world. And then we supplemented that with a data-based analysis.
Like the data Wilson was just talking about?
Some of the data Wilson was mentioning, and I think one of the big things that was able to add a lot to the report was we analyzed the National Survey of College Graduates, which is a survey that the National Science Foundation conducts of who the highly educated people in the United States are, foreign and domestic. And what they ask specifically is about where projects that they're working on are funded. And so we're able to look at among college graduates in the US working for DoD-funded projects, who are they, where were they born, what fields are they in, what kinds of things are they studying. And the big value of this survey is that it can allow us to dial in on the foreign-born college graduates and their native counterparts who are working on actual DoD-funded projects. So among the highly educated people on those projects funded by the DoD, who are they, where were they born, what did they study when they were in school, what kinds of fields are they in? All of these questions are things that we're able to now answer for the first time.
So it can get pretty quantitative.
Exactly.
As well.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that all of the data points that we just described very clearly show that there is some existing workforce challenges in the defense industrial base. And then ultimately this affects our ability to be economically competitive in a range of sectors, whether it's commercial, non-defense commercial, and the defense industrial base.
So let's unpack that a little bit. What do you think, why are these foreign-born STEM professionals such an attractive potential source of labor? What have you unpacked some of the benefits that we have already gotten from some of these beyond those good stories?
Yeah, so we separated in the report between, general U.S. S&T ecosystem and then defense specifically. And so I've got some numbers that I can quickly run through that I think paints a pretty clear picture. And so, for example, in terms of past performance, 44% of Fortune 500 companies in the US were founded by an immigrant or the child of an immigrant. And that was from 2021. Immigrants have been awarded a 38%
and that's punching above their weight.
Correct.
Relative to their percentage of the total population.
Yeah, only about 14% of the US population is foreign-born.
Yeah, correct. And so I think that makes this next statistic extremely clear in that immigrants have been awarded 38% of the Nobel Prizes in chemistry, medicine, and physics since 2000. So the Institute for Defense Analyses found that STEM immigrants add 400 billion to GDP annually, and immigrant-founded companies add about an additional 300 billion to the GDP annually. Again, this is from 2021. So they found that immigrants, whether naturalized or not, accounted for 23% of all STEM workers in the United States. And this is an increase from the previous number, which comes from 2000, when it was about 16%. And then in defense specifically, DoD relies on foreign-born STEM graduates disproportionately compared to native-born individuals for jobs requiring STEM education. And so about 84% of foreign-born graduates working on DoD-funded projects have degrees in STEM compared to 54% of those born in the United States. And that comes from the kind of the data scraping that Jeremy was talking about.
If I were to distill all of this, I think it comes down essentially to the fact that our high-skilled talent across the U.S. workforce is increasingly international. If you look at colleges and universities, people who study here in the United States, depending on the field, up to a majority in some cases of the PhDs that are coming out of those programs are going to be foreign-born. And so in highly technical defense work, where if half of the general workforce is foreign-born, tapping into that is going to be vital in order to get the best and brightest to be working.
And it's compounded by the fact that some percentage of these students, foreign-born students, are being paid for by DoD research dollars. And so I guess we're saying that Pentagon's making an investment in doing interesting basic research at universities in fields of interest to DoD, training students who want to stay in the country and continue to contribute in some of these same fields, and we don't have the greatest mechanisms to allow them to stay.
So a quick statistic about that is when we think about retention rates, it varies across different levels of education from bachelor's, master's, and PhD levels. The doctorate levels tend to be the highest retention rates. It's about 65-70% retention rate from 5 years after graduation and 10 years after graduation. Master's degree, a little bit less than that. Bachelor's degree, it's about 1 in 5 who will typically stay. So that's a significant loss of talent.
Yeah, and I think what's even more concerning about this, the retention rate should be a lot higher, but they're starting to fall. And we're seeing that where the retention was 5 to 10 years ago, we can't even get that today. If you look at the share of people on student visas requesting another visa, people who are trying to transition onto something more permanent into the country, that peaked back in 2007. And if those trends continue, it's going to be quite concerning for our ability to actually benefit from all those research dollars that we're spending.
And when we think about the national security industrial base, innovation base, a big component of this is the workforce. And so what you're saying is that, the decline in our ability to bring in the workforce is also then weakening the innovation base, industrial base that's supporting our national security. So the other side of all of this discussion is the security aspect of it. And there's often fair discussion about national security concerns that come in with bringing in foreign talent to work on these national security issues. So what have to say, or how do you think about balancing reasonable national security requirements with this need to attract international expertise?
Yeah, so the first thing to notice, in my opinion, is that the biggest constraint on the ability for the defense base to tap into international talent doesn't require any changes in screening, vetting. We're talking about naturalized citizens who have been vetted to get security clearances, who've been here for a long time, they have deep roots in the United States. And the problem is that an increasing share of people, especially from India, but also from other allied countries, are staying in the United States on a very tenuous status. So the share of people who are from those countries who've been able to naturalize used to be much higher. Today, they're much more likely to be on temporary visas. And the reason for that is because a green card, which is the first stepping stone to become a citizen, those are capped. And that leads to growing wait times. And so now, in the past, someone could come, they could stay here for 20 years, and at some point in that after they've been here for 20 years, they could naturalize, prove that they are eligible for security clearance, and then work on a DoD project. Today, that opportunity is increasingly closed off. An Indian who stays here for 20 years with a bachelor's degree in a very technical field, even after 20 years, they might still be forced to be on a temporary visa. And so that opportunity for them to get a security clearance is closed off, and our ability to tap into their talents is forfeited.
Yeah, I guess my dad came to study computer science in 1968. I think he became a citizen by 1976, as I recall. I was a child. But that would be considered extremely quick these days?
Yeah, that would be extremely quick these days. Another way to look at this is in the 80s, the people who were admitted into the US as immigrants who were scientists, about 40% of them were under the age of 30. So we were able to get young people here on green cards. 5 years later, they'd be eligible to become a citizen. And then we could use them for
contribute
defense.
in lots of different ways. Yeah.
And in the commercial sector.
Yeah.
Today, 5% are under the age of 30 because most of them are trapped and aging in the temporary visa limbo, essentially. And then broadly, I would just say that there's a lot we can do, a lot of like targeted security efforts that can be made that don't forfeit the possibility of the talent in the first place. So counter-espionage, strengthening vetting, fully funding the National Vetting Center, beefing up reporting requirements, having the ability for DHS to know which particular immigrants had access to sensitive information just so that they can even track that at all. All of those things can significantly advance our security, but without turning away talented people to go work for our adversaries.
Yeah, and it takes advantage of one of our great strengths compared to some of the countries we're competing with. People actually want to come here. They want to stay here. They want to raise their families here. And it's kind of foolish to turn them away, especially compounded by the fact that we need them, and sometimes we paid to them to do the research. So it gets complicated, especially for those in the defense sector. Can you talk to us? You're the immigration expert here, right? Can you talk to us about some of the immigration pathways and which ones are most lend themselves for use in the national security world?
Yep. So as we've already discussed a little bit, for most projects that are funded directly by the DoD, most foreign-born talent are naturalized because so many of these jobs require security clearances. So looking at the most recent data of about 113,000 international workers, people born abroad who are working on defense-funded projects, 100,000 of them were naturalized, only about 10,000 were not.
So fully U.S. citizens, naturalized, fully U.S. citizens,
Yes,
can
exactly
get a security clearance, work on whatever their clearance allows them to work on.
Yep. Of the remaining, about half were permanent residents, and half were on temporary visas. The important thing, though, is that in order to naturalize, you first have to navigate the immigration maze to get here. Almost all of the people who eventually naturalized started out on some other visa before they applied for a green card. And so,
Like a student visa.
Yep, that's our biggest recruitment mechanism. The U.S. brings in about 300,000 international students a year, and about half of them try to stay in the United States and immediately start working. Of those, only a portion of them will get a permanent visa that's not their student visa to stay. The biggest flagship high-skilled immigration program that most of those international students who want to stay are trying to get is the H-1B program. That offers about 85,000 visas to the private sector, and other visas are available for academia, which aren't subject to that cap. But that's the primary way that we recruit international students and bring in some additional people from abroad.
And how does that work? They're allocated to the private sector. 10 go to the big company, 5 go to the small. How does the allocation work?
Yeah, so essentially, Congress has set up the system so that there's no prioritization among the applicants. Everyone who registers for a visa gets put into a lottery, with the minor caveat that people who have advanced degrees from U.S. universities get 2 attempts at the lottery because there's
ping pong balls in the machine.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because there's a 20,000 visas are set aside for them, but otherwise everyone is competing for the same slots, and the government can do nothing to say that if you're contributing more, we're going to make sure that you get a visa. And so essentially, the H-1B program comes down to 2 very different kinds of business models, 2 very different kinds of pathways. There is a highly skilled, talented pathway where a company does international recruitment. They find who they think is the best person for the job, and it really matters to them to be able to employ that person and bring them here on an H-1B. That's contrasted with another business model, which is one that doesn't really care about a particular individual. These are companies that employ a large percentage of their workforce on H-1B visas, and the business model is essentially spam the system with as many applications as possible, get as many approvals as possible, and then you can contract out those workers to other businesses. The canonical case of this are IT services consultancy companies.
But one of the big cloud firms or IT firms looking for senior AI engineers or very, very highly qualified AI engineers, in the lottery system, they're treated exactly the same as any other company looking for any other kind of talent.
That's exactly right.
And then I'm aware that there's also country limitations. And how does that work?
So the country limitations come into effect when someone is trying to stay permanently. So if they're trying to transition from their H-1B, or another visa is an O-1 for extraordinary ability, which is a way that we bring top scientists here on a temporary basis. But if they're trying to stay here permanently, then they have to get in line for what's called a green card. And those green cards, there's a much smaller number of them that are available than there are temporary visas that we get out. And so again, there's a big bottleneck there. And what makes matters worse is that there's a country limitation that effectively means that some countries, India is the strongest case, have much longer wait times than other countries. And so for an Indian national who is trying to get a permanent residence in the United States, they're here, their petition has even been approved. So the government has said that they qualify to stay here permanently. Their wait times can be over 100 years. For many of them, with
and not many
advanced
AI
degrees.
engineers survive 100 years.
Exactly. So they're basically told, you can come here and work, but you can't stay here. And so that problem has a lot of downstream consequences. One is there's never a chance that they're going to naturalize, which means that they're ineligible for security clearances outright. The second problem is once they know that they're unlikely to actually secure permanent residency, then they're going to start rethinking whether they want to come to the United States in the first place. And so what we're already seeing is a deterrent effect where our recruitment isn't working as well as it used to. People are less interested in coming in the first place. International enrollment is stagnated.
Yeah.
And then once they come, they're less likely to want to stay.
And if you think about computer science and computer technology in India, in the 70s when my dad was making this decision, there were approximately no jobs in India in IT. There were some. It's a totally different world now, right? So there is, in all of these countries, more of a compelling case to come back home, be with your family again, and keep your citizenship back home and get a decent IT job.
You can stay at home, or you can now go to other countries, which are making an increasingly strong bid to compete with the United States for talent. So 40 years ago, almost every international student came to the United States. The United States captured the vast majority of globally mobile scientists in the world. Today, that's not true anymore. As far as the US share of international students in the OECD goes, the US has fallen to a minority. Canada, Germany, the UK and Germany now graduate about as many international students as the US does, even though they're smaller, less important countries with, on average, worse universities. And a large reason for that is they've been proactive about trying to recruit, and they're taking advantage of some US complacency on high-skilled immigration.
So, we talk about H-1Bs. It's a big thing in the media today. Are there opportunities for reform that you think shows some promise here?
Yeah, so I think we've talked about how crazy the lottery is, that we're essentially trying to build our Team America, and we're recruiting based on random chance instead of using talent scouts to find the best people. So I think moving away from the lottery has bipartisan support and could go somewhere, whether that's moving toward a point-based system or something that's just based on compensation. So that
what's a point-based system?
A points-based system would prioritize workers based on different characteristics that they have. So, for instance, if they graduated from a U.S. university with a STEM PhD, they might get 10 points, and if they only graduated with a STEM master's, they might get 5 points.
And so those with the most points might float to the top.
Exactly.
Got it.
But a points-based system provides a lot of flexibility, so you can tailor it to whatever needs you want.
Right.
A simpler system to maybe implement might be a compensation-based system, maybe with some adjustments for age to get early career people who are going to contribute to the U.S. a long time. But essentially, no matter what we adopt,
basically that means people who would move into higher paying type positions, which in theory are more valuable to national security or the economy or the healthcare system, float to the top in that case.
Yeah, it's going to be providing more value to the U.S. economy, and they're much less likely to be competing with American workers.
Just out of curiosity, compensation-based, I guess this is, how do basketball players, hockey players, Shohei Ohtani, how do they get in the country? Under what status?
A lot of them come in on a subcategory of the O1 visa. The O1 is for extraordinary ability, and there's basically the O1A, which is for nerds, and the O1B, which is for jocks. So if you're a model or an athlete, you come in on the O1B, and if you're a dorky scientist, you come in on the O1A. Those are uncapped visas.
Those are uncapped and not capped by country or anything like that.
That's right. One challenge with the O1s, though, is that you need they require a demonstrated track record of achievement, and so we're much more likely to get someone who's late in their career, who's had a chance to make their pioneering breakthroughs abroad, and now they're going to come here on an O1, which is great. But it's not tailored to getting someone early on who's then going to actually make their breakthroughs in the U.S.
In our discussions, looking at this report, you talked about a unique DoD form of H-1B. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so the DoD has a set aside of 100 H-1Bs called the H-1B2. And these are for people who are working on DoD cooperative or co-production projects that are the result of government-to-government agreements.
With our allies.
With our allies, exactly. The trouble is that the DoD doesn't treat this program very, very seriously, and so it's only using about 30% of the visas which it's allowed to use.
It's 100 at all times or 100
That's right.
a year? Okay.
Yeah. Can you speculate why that might be? Is it cultural? What do you think is driving them to not make full use of this opportunity?
I think part of it is simply that it's no one's job to do it. The research projects themselves, those fall under someone's purview, but from DoD's perspective, the immigration is a job for DHS, and from DHS's perspective, the H-1B2 is a problem for the DoD, and so no one pays attention to it, and it leads to it being severely underutilized.
But by definition, these are with places we already have cooperative agreements with.
Exactly.
So you can think about NATO nations, Five Eyes nations, AUKUS nations, and potentially making use of talent just from those kinds of places.
Yep, I think there's a lot from the H-1B2 to other kinds of cooperative arrangements where the U.S. could be making much more of a directed push toward working with our allies in cooperative ways and in benefiting from talent who are at partner countries.
So that's a great recommendation. I hope someone picks up on that one. What are some of the other recommendations that came out of the report?
Yeah, so in addition to the H-1B2 visa, there are other existing programs that allow for foreign citizenship participation. And so we essentially advocate for those programs to be scaled. So this includes things like DARPA's Young Faculty Award, the Quad Fellowship, which has actually recently opened up to a lot of Southeastern Asian countries as well. So places like Myanmar, Singapore, etc. And then the Smart Scholarship. And then that scholarship is also open to individuals from the Five Eyes countries. And for DARPA's Young Faculty Award program, that is open to individuals, any individual who is studying at a U.S. University or institution. And so we encourage, we appreciate these programs and we'd like to see them scaled up. One thing that we also want to mention is that in that 113,000 number that Jeremy had mentioned earlier, and then 8,000 permanent residents, I bet some people are asking, well, how can these individuals be working on DoD-funded projects if they're not a U.S. citizen? There is something called a limited access authorization waiver, which essentially allows them to work on that specific project and receive essentially a clearance up to the secret level
For that project.
only for that particular project. And so, we encourage that use as well. Other recommendations, Jeremy had mentioned the H-1B2 program. We would like to see DoD make full use of that. Then just another one to list out is that DoD should use interested government agency waivers for critical talent. And that's essentially kind of a similar thing to that limited access authorization waiver. It essentially removes some of the barriers for the J-1 visa in particular that require foreign nationals to leave the country for 2 years before applying for a new visa. And so we're essentially just trying to find creative ways to, one, make use of existing authorities and keep people here in the United States working on projects. There are about 9 recommendations in the report, but these are just a couple that we wanted to highlight.
This is a lot about competition, sometimes with our friends and sometimes with our competitors or our adversaries. I'm curious, how is the rest of the world positioning themselves here? You talked about Germans and UK doing better, but are there best practices that you see out there in the world that we might want to emulate or modify?
Yeah, so I think a lot of countries have started to take the global competition for talent quite seriously and have seen big gains in recruitment. I think one kind of funny, kind of sad example is Canada making a real designated push to try to poach Americans who found American-based international workers who found themselves stuck in this temporary status limbo. And so they created a program to allow for 10,000 visas that would be available to people in the United States on H-1Bs who were stuck in line for a green card. And within 24 hours of that program's announcement, all the slots got taken up because a lot of in the United States, there's a lot of people who are looking at the line and realizing they're not advancing in the line at all. I think that's emblematic of a much larger push than just those 10,000 visas, which is that a lot of countries are being quite proactive about trying to recruit particular people. Another good example is, and maybe one that the US could probably learn a lot more from, is the UK has established visas for high potential individuals. So people who are graduates from top universities in the world, and giving them an opportunity to come to the UK, try out living and working there, having the free ability to move jobs, and then when it's complete, to transition onto some other kind of more permanent status.
Without knowing exactly who they're going to work for, or sort of drafting a best available athlete and hoping they contribute to the team somehow.
Exactly. There's been similar efforts in Germany, in Singapore. Both of them have adopted more skills-based, merit-based systems. But across the board, I think what we're seeing is the US has long assumed that we're going to be the destination, everyone wants to come here, and we don't have to be proactive about it. And other countries have seen that as an opportunity to cut into it. Much more concerningly, of course, is that China has run talent programs, most notably the 1,000 Talents program, but also its mysterious successor program called the Qiming program, that are designed to, again, proactively identify the scientists or other researchers or technologists who they want to return, the talent that they want, and to go recruit them. Historically, it's mostly been focused on returners, so people who have some origin in China, but starting with the 14th five-year plan, their goals now are to turn toward more broad-based international recruitment for the first time, with a goal to be competitive by 2035 in the war for talent. Whether they'll be successful, we'll have to see. It shows that countries that can be proactive can find returns, especially when the U.S. is not doing anything to really help itself.
Yeah, and it's amazing. A country that's no shortage of population, producing that huge number of STEM graduates like China is still doing their best to recruit the best and brightest from other places to come, including offering packages to these researchers of lab space and funding that we just yet have been able to figure out how to compete with. Strikes me as just another battle for resources in the same way we battle for who's got the rare earth materials and that sort of.
Yep, I think every country who's tried to make a real bid for talent realizes that it doesn't have a monopoly on smart people. If it can recruit a smart person from another country, that's to its advantage.
So we're running out of time here. So Jeremy, how else should we be thinking about this broader connection between immigration and defense?
Like I mentioned, I think countries that can show some kind of proactive recruitment will find that they can really get an edge in the competition for talent and thereby get a technological edge in developing new technologies and harnessing new technologies. And I think the US has actually a long history of being proactive about recruitment that we've kind of forgotten in at least the last 30 years. So, right after World War II, the canonical example was Project Paperclip, where we were competing with the countries we were allied to win the war with for the talented German scientists. And we didn't get quite as many scientists as the Russians, but because our Germans were better than their Germans, we were able to land a man on the moon. But it didn't end with Project Paperclip. There was a successor program in the 50s. After the fall of the Soviet Union, we made it a similar push to try to recruit former Soviet scientists. And I think right now would be an opportunity to look back at those proactive recruitment methods and try to adopt a more Project Paperclip mindset about recruitment.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say that a lot of our current economic, technological, national security advantages have been built stealing talent from other countries. And going back to what you're talking about, Manhattan Project, even before that, and it just doesn't make sense to give away that advantage that we have with other places. So where can Wilson people get the report?
Online on our website at emergingtechnologies.org. We're also posting it on social media, so if you're on LinkedIn, you can find it there, but check out our reports page.
Well, it's great. Wilson Miles is with the Emerging Technologies Institute, and Jeremy Neufeld's with the Institute for Progress. Thank you for this educational discussion about high-skilled immigration.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching Emerging Tech Horizons. I'd like you all to visit ETI's website to sign up for our mailing list, register for our various webinars, events, and educational offerings, including our Tech 101 series. If you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to like our episodes and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with all of our latest content. A special thank you to Melanie Yu and Daniel Park for producing this podcast. Thanks again for joining us on Emerging Tech Horizons.